Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a customer engineer focused on management technologies. Today's discussion is focused on orchestration groups, which is part of Configuration Manager, which is part of the Microsoft Endpoint Manager product. So this discussion is one that I've wanted to get to for a little bit. Actually, there's been some previous discussion on something similar called server groups. So orchestration groups is the next iteration of server groups. In fact, with that, let me just get to the agenda real quick and we'll hit it. So what are orchestration groups? Why we care about them like normal, and then we're going to go through them, the requirements, see how they work, work through some scenarios, configure these things, show them to you in action, and then we will start to wrap up, right? So what are orchestration groups? Well, orchestration groups were introduced in Configuration Manager Current Branch 2002. This session is based on Config Manager Current Branch 2006 plus a hotfix rollup. So let me talk about that for a minute. A little bit of detail in there. First, I waited for the hotfix rollup in Config Manager 2006 because there is a stored procedure that was updated in the hotfix rollup that had specifically to do with some of the orchestration group maintenance, which I'll show you, as we get further into the session. And in my environment, it wasn't working right. And so in the hotfix rollup, they optimized the stored procedure to where it does. Prior to that, I was getting an exception looking at the properties of my orchestration group, probably too much detail from here. But now that that has released, that has gone away. So also, just jumping ahead a little bit, well, I'll go in order, right? Also, what are orchestration groups? Well, this is a pre-release feature, even in 2006 plus the hotfix rollup. Now, pre-release is fully production supported. It just means that it's a feature that could be subject to additional engineering and updating and changing, right? And then finally, orchestration groups, they are an evolution of server groups. We've had server groups in the product all the way up until when we introduced orchestration groups. And orchestration groups definitely work in the same line of thinking as server groups. The behind the scenes, how they work is different, right? So I think much better. I would have no hesitation to use orchestration groups at all, and I think hopefully you will agree after watching this. And then finally, orchestration groups are all about software updates. One of the questions that I've received when I've talked about this with some customers is, hey, is there an opportunity to include orchestration groups as part of other things like application model or packages or whatever? And the answer today is no. The future, maybe, is always subject to change. If that's something that would be of interest to you, certainly user voice would be a good place to surface that request. But right now, it's all about software updates, right? Now, let's talk about that for a minute. So typically, when we think about something like orchestration groups, we think about it focused on servers, right? Because servers are the kind of system that we need to focus on, maybe more so than desktops, right? I'll say this again coming up in another slide, but think about clusters, right? Maybe SharePoint implementations, Exchange implementations, right? Those have certain requirements for how you bring them down and bring them back up and so on. Historically, we really haven't been able to play very easily with coordinating those things. Yes, with server groups we were, and now with orchestration groups we absolutely can. And so if there are groups inside your organization that are manually managing software updates because of the way they have to control their systems being brought down, being brought back up, this could be a very interesting option for them. Now, I say we typically think about servers. This is not limited to servers. It would be any config manager managed device, right? So think about orchestration group rules applying to devices for all software update deployments that they might have, right? And so another category where that would apply might be Windows 10 in a virtualized environment. So I have a couple of customers who when they do patching, software updating every cycle, they complain because the load is being put heavily onto the virtual machine host when all of the machines tend to fire at once to install a software update, right? Well, there's a lot of mitigations for helping with that kind of scenario, but one of them could be orchestration groups so that things don't all run at the same time. There's definitely some controls in there. Now, I'm going to say something here that may not completely make sense, and I will illustrate it as we go forward, but I just want to make sure that I say it. So orchestration groups are entities that exist that can be populated by using a collection as a reference. They definitely don't have to be tied to collections at all. You can populate them without being tied to a collection. I'll show you that. But very often, let me back into it this way. Very often when we talk about things like maintenance windows, at least in the early days, customers would believe that in order for a device targeted with a deployment to honor the maintenance window, the collection that is targeted for the deployment is where the maintenance window needs to be configured. And that is wrong, right? In fact, best practice for configuring maintenance windows says that you should not configure maintenance windows on your collections you target for the deployment, right? You need them standalone in order to be managed, and you can see what the maintenance windows are that you're defining, what systems are a part of those maintenance windows, and so on, right? So the point is, you can use a collection to define a maintenance window, but that collection does not have to be the one that is targeted for the deployment of whatever you're deploying. Well, so orchestration groups, as you'll see in a minute, are not collections. They are items that you build in a specific node in the console, but the concept applies. You define your orchestration groups, and the devices in the orchestration groups receive through policy the orchestration details that they need to receive. Right now, because it's orchestration groups, because they're not collections, and because they stand apart from collections, you can't target a deployment to an orchestration group, which I actually wish we would have done that with maintenance windows, right? And that may be one reason that we pulled orchestration groups out separate from collections. And so when you now target your deployment of a software update, you do it the normal way. And those devices in your target collection that are not subject to an orchestration group just proceed normally. Those that are in an orchestration group have that extra layer of work that they need to do. Again, I'll illustrate this, more definitely as we go along. So why do we care about these orchestration groups? Well, I've already mentioned it, right? Granular control for sensitive systems. Could be clusters, could be SharePoint, Exchange, could be virtual environments. I already talked about it, right? Could be your own, variant of this, right? But having that granular control on these systems as they go through the software updating process is a pretty big deal. So what are the requirements for orchestration groups? Well, on the server side, we need the administrator who's configuring these to be full admin. Obviously, to use the orchestration group component, you need to enable it. So enable the feature for orchestration groups. And then as you're building your orchestration groups, know that you can only have 1,000 members within a single orchestration group. Now that probably should be sufficient, right? But just know that is a limitation. On the client side, then you do need to have the latest client software because there's very tight integration between the client and the server infrastructure to make all of this work, as you'll see in a minute. And then another requirement is that the members of the orchestration group must all be assigned to the same site. So if you have a CAS and a couple of primaries, you can't mix the membership of the orchestration group to include clients from multiple sites. They all have to belong to the same site. Devices cannot be in more than one orchestration group. They have to be unique in orchestration groups, right? That kind of makes sense based on the kind of function we're talking about. And then you just know the orchestration group process is a process that only gets fired if the software updates are initiated according to their schedule, right? If you have an administrator that goes into Software Center and manually initiates a software update from there, the orchestration group process will be bypassed. Here's also a good time to say what I think is going to be probably repeated a couple of times again, because it's such an important part, such an important point. When you configure orchestration groups and deploy them, the devices, the clients that are part of the orchestration group will receive policy to know that they are part of the orchestration group. Then, when a software update required deadline is reached, that is when the orchestration process begins, not before. Why do I say that? Again, I'll illustrate this again in a minute. There is a node or an option in the console to manually start the orchestration process, right? Now, and you can do that, and I'll do that, right? But that process does not do anything. Well, I wouldn't say it doesn't do anything. It definitely does not result in software updates being installed on the target devices, because, at least in my case, the required time for those software updates has not been reached. I'll show you that, right? So here's the point. In order for the software updates to be installed through the orchestration process, they must have already gone past their required deadline. Okay, so I want to say that. I'll say it a couple more times. It's a really, really important point. Okay, so how does this work? So this is my graphical attempt to kind of go through the process of how this works. So the first thing is we're going to have an administrator working in the console and identifying devices that should be added to an orchestration group, right? Then through the console, the admin has a couple of options. They could have a collection already built. Now, I don't think this is necessary. It might be good for kind of a visual representation of what systems are, or maybe there are already collections that are built to that contain the devices that we care about. So, however, right, one option is that you can go to the collection list and you can find a collection and add devices to your orchestration group from collections. Now, that might have the implication that somehow the orchestration group is tied to the collection. It is not. It is just a convenience for you to be able to use a collection to pick members for your orchestration group. Now, that's one. Number two, you don't have to do that. You can just go search for devices that you might want to add to an orchestration group and add them one at a time directly. Either way is fine, right? Whatever you want to do to populate your orchestration group. And then you finish through the wizard and go ahead and create your orchestration group. And that's what I'm trying to illustrate here, right? You might have collections that are your source for members of the orchestration group. You might have individual devices that are your source for membership in orchestration groups, either way, right? So once you have those built and it's time to deploy updates, the administrator is going to go through and deploy the software updates as normal to the normal deployment collections, right? Now, once we do that and start rolling forward on the updates, if the devices that are in the collection are part of the orchestration group, then when the deadline is reached, right, then we will go ahead and honor the settings associated with the orchestration group. Not before. Very big point. Does not go in, and orchestration group settings do not go into effect until the required deadline is passed, right? And then finally, again, just a note to drive home the point, the orchestration group membership is separate and apart from any deployment collection targeting, right? So this is how you set it all up. Now, how does it work? So effectively, you have a site server, you have a management point, right? And these are your clients. So in my example here, I have 3 clients, 2 of which are part of an orchestration group, right? And one of them is not. So when the installation deadline is reached, this client will just go ahead and install the software update like normal, nothing extra added. But in this case, when the installation deadline is reached, the client will have to get permission effectively from the site server to say, can I go ahead and deploy, right? And the answer is either yes or no. And so what you see highlighted is that the client makes heavy use of the notification channel, high-speed notification channel with the site to communicate and get real-time permission. Can I go forward? Can I not go forward? The process is called acquiring a lock. When the client acquires a lock, it's able to process forward with the software update install, right? If the client can't get a lock and the lock is granted based on your settings that you configure in the rules that you'll see in a minute, then it can't proceed and we'll have to keep cycling back and asking for a lock until it's able to get one, right? So that's the difference. There's also some things in here, as you'll see in a minute, where policy the client receives for the software updated from the site will dictate whether it is supposed to organize or implement its software update deployment through orchestration group settings, right? And that's where it will go back and communicate with the site and know that it needs to kick in with the high-speed notification channel. And you'll see all of this. Okay, so before we get to the configuring demo and so on, just a couple of scenarios where this might play out. So the first scenario, the most detailed scenario, you're the software updates administrator and you manage all of the update processes, right? There's one large collection for all servers and one large collection for all clients, and you deploy software updates to those collections, right? Now, just go with me. This is, I know, probably not the true scenario that you have, but it's a good one to illustrate. The SQL administrators decide that they would like to go ahead and connect up with the automated software update process, but they have a concern because they need additional control. So, for example, they can only patch 5 servers at a time, and they have to be done in a specific order, right? Also, they need to manually stop specific services before installing updates, and then they need to restart those services afterwards. And they come asking, hey, is there a solution that you can give us to be able to implement these controls? And the answer is absolutely yes, right? So as the administrator, you go ahead and create an orchestration group. You add all 5 of those SQL servers. You specify the rule option to control the order in which this goes, and you set that up. I'll show that to you. And then finally, you take the script that the SQL Server team gives you, or you write it yourself, working with them or whatever, and you configure that in a pre and a post action using PowerShell, and then that will work. And so during the next update cycle, you deploy them as normal, and the SQL servers now go through this extra layer of orchestration process driven by the orchestration group, right? So scenario 2 would be similar, except maybe domain controllers. Maybe you have a number of domain controllers in a certain region, and you want to make sure not more than a certain percentage or certain number are down for updating at any given time. And so you might want to use this orchestration group process to control that. Already talked about scenario 3, Windows 10 VDI, maybe. You're concerned that your VM host is overloaded and the resources that are demanded for these virtual machines rebooting and patching and all of that simultaneously is too much. And you want to have some control over the number that are able to work at the same time, right? So this certainly would be an option, for that. All right, so let's get into the fun stuff and get into configuring this. So I want to show you in the Configuration Manager console how we go about configuring orchestration groups. I actually have an orchestration group, as you're probably not surprised, that is set up already for processes. Let me bring in the Configuration Manager console. Where did it go? Let me find it. Okay, pull it up, and here we go. All right, so here's the Configuration Manager console. And so orchestration groups are, as you see right here under Assets and Compliance. So you see I already have one, right? And so let me just go through the process quickly to show you a part of this, right? So whenever you go create a new, I'm not going to walk through this whole wizard. I'll use the one that I've created to be a guide to kind of explaining this. But let me show you one thing. So I'm just going to call this test. And so when I go forward, I have to go ahead and identify members that I want to add to the orchestration group. So I'll click on Add, and this is where you will add members. Now let me shift over to this particular orchestration group I've already built, and we'll talk about the rest of it, right? And including what we just talked about. So if I go to properties on here, you'll see the same screens, right? And so here's where I define timeouts for the orchestration group in total. So you need to factor in how many devices are in the orchestration group all up. And then the timeout for individual members of the orchestration group. Then here's where I go add members. Now you notice I have the member, and then I have the resource ID associated with that member. That's very useful for troubleshooting in the logs. So remember 220 and 222 are the two devices that are members of this orchestration group. If I want to add others, simple matter, I can just go in here and go ahead and put in a name string to search for and press search. Now in my very small lab, that's not a big deal. I have 3 additional machines that I could add in, right? Now to show up in this list, the device has to be an active client. I know that I have several other devices in the site that are not active clients. They have to be active clients that are working correctly. Or the other thing I could do is I could use this browse feature to go into a collection and then pull the devices that I want out of that collection. So let me just go ahead and pull in this demo orchestration group collection, right? Nothing shows up here. Why? Because these 2 devices are the only devices in that collection, right? I could go add another one, here, let's search here, and then go into, I don't know, this one has 4 devices in it, so it should have 2 more that show up. Search, there we go. So there's 2 devices from this collection that show up, total of 4. I've already got this done, so no big deal, but just another point, the being able to browse a collection for adding members to the orchestration group is absolutely a convenience. It is not linking the orchestration group to the collection, right? Okay, then once I have that done, I'm going to specify my rules. Now in my lab, I'm using this one, only allow 1 device at a time to apply updates. So I have 2 devices, so that way only 1 at a time can go. Or you can go up and you can say, okay, allow a certain percentage of devices. So if you have 10 devices in the orchestration group and you allow 10% of them to run at a time, that means 1 at a time. If you later expand that to 50 devices in the orchestration group, then that's 5 at a time. I don't prefer this option because it doesn't give you exact control, of how things go. Maybe it works for you, and if it does, cool. But if you add members to your orchestration group over time, it will change the number that can go at a given time, right? Depending on that. And then finally, if you need a specific order of operations, it's here. You can move devices up, move them down, whatever the case may be, and we will use this specific order of operations. And that's all you need to configure. For VDI, and that load on the virtual machine host, that may be all you want to do. But it may be that you want to do something like in the case of a SQL server or clusters or whatever, there's something you need to do before you kick in with the software update process. So this is just a very, very simple PowerShell script that will write down a file called start in the temp directory that we can see visually it worked. And then the software update process runs, and then we go ahead and move on to the post action, right? And here, so another simple iteration of this just writes in end, and we know that part fired as well. Now, while I'm in here, there's just some attributes you can see, right? Certainly the name of the orchestration group, your site code, what type of orchestration is, so numerical, 1 at a time is the value. Currently, we're idle. And this is the last time we did it, and on we go, right? There's some more detail over to the right? There's also some detail that I might want to add. This is not here by default. Orchestration group ID. So when you look through the logs, you will see a reference to the orchestration group ID. And if you don't know that's what you're looking at, it may be a little bit confusing to you. And then here's the unique ID GUID for the orchestration group. All right. So all of that information is very useful. Then also, if I go into the orchestration group and show members, then those members have detail of their own, current state, idle. So if you had 10 or 12 members in here, you could simply look through this list and see which one or ones were processing at a given time, right? And then sequence number and different detail. There's, if we right click on here, there's a few other things that you could add in if you wanted to. Orchestration group ID, orchestration group unique ID, you could put those in, right? So this is very useful information to be able to have here. And while I'm here, let me just go ahead and show you, right? We'll come back to this in just, oops. Well, my ConfigMgr console just crashed. That's okay. Let me go ahead and reopen it. I'll show this to you again. You'll see it again in a minute when we stitch some pieces together. But let me go ahead and show it to you here, right? If we look at the orchestration group, there is an option on the orchestration group to start orchestration. I'll do that in a minute. But just know that doing that with software updates that have not yet reached their required time is not going to be effective at getting those software updates installed. Yes, you can work through the orchestration process. Now, the orchestration itself won't run like the pre and post scripts aren't going to run. The rules will be adhered to, one at a time. You'll see that in a minute. But the software updates won't install, so the pre and post actions won't run, right? So I'm going to show it to you two ways. In fact, let me go ahead and minimize this and move on. And we'll step over into where I'm going to show it to you live, right, in action. So let me pull the system back up. So I'm going to show it to you two ways. The first way, so whenever I present this live, it's really harder to show the actual software update installation part because it requires timing to work out, and so it's more challenging. Here I'll show you the software update install portion, but first I want to show you what I showed during live discussions of this, and that is just the engine itself working. So I have my orchestration group. It is currently idle, right? I'm going to start that in a minute, but before I get started, let me just show you. I have my device collection up here. I already told you this was just a convenience collection for being able to maybe seed the orchestration group. It's not going to do anything other than that, right? No other purpose. Don't need to even have it. Here's my collection that I'm going to target my software updates to, right? It has 4 devices in it, 2 of which, my 2 domain controllers, are subject to orchestration. The other 2 are Windows 10 machines and are not subject to orchestration at all, right? And so I've targeted my software updates there, and let's go confirm that. So under software library, I have my software update group here, and it is in fact targeted, my deployment. Here's the deployment name. It's targeted to that collection. It's required, so I've deployed it, right? But it's required on December 31st, right? So it's not required for some time. And so triggering the orchestration group is not going to cause any kind of software update install. So we'll go ahead and manually initiate first the software up or the orchestration group to run. Then we'll do it automatically, right? So the way I initiate it manually is to first go to the orchestration groups where I can do it, and then click on the name of the orchestration group and click Start Orchestration. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start it. It's going to tell me, and it's going to shift over from idle to in progress, right? And so remember I said I could show members on this, and I will be able to see that it's working on this particular system. So that's the first one, right? Now I'm going to let that run. It's not going to do anything, right? But what I do want to show you is the details behind this. So I'm going to start bleeding over a little bit and showing you some of the details behind it. There's a couple of logs on the server that are instructive here. The key one is called SMS_orchestration group, and it's right here, right? So I could go to the live log, and you will whenever you're troubleshooting this, but I went ahead and while that's running, I went ahead and pulled out portions of this log to show you this process and what actually happens in a bit of detail, right? So this is a snip where the process starts, and yes, I'm using Notepad as my favorite log viewer here. Actually, that's not true. In this case, it works out well. I love trace and so on, so there you go. But in this case, so here we're just checking, right? This is a process that loops. It just runs over time, over and over again, right? So we're evaluating the orchestration group. Starting, we find out that the orchestration group is not in the active state, so it's skipped, right? And again, orchestration group is not in the active state, so it's skipped. And so this is the orchestration group ID that you can correlate to the console. Then we'll see a file change detected in the inbox for the orchestration group process, and it will have a unique ID. This unique ID comes from one of our database tables and flags the orchestration group process to work on that, to look at that, and so on. And then you'll see another one down here is another ID for the second machine in my orchestration group down here, I think. All right. Anyway, so we're looping through. Here's the process starting again, and there's really nothing to do. So here it starts again. I intentionally put this space in the log. There wasn't one to start with. It's just visually to tell me where the break is. So now we start the process. Now notice a few things. Orchestration group cleaning process starts. So let me pop into the console again for a second. So I mentioned that I waited until hotfix rollup came out for ConfigMgr 2006 that I'm running. Why? Because prior to that hotfix rollup, once I created my orchestration group and then immediately went back in, I wouldn't get this. I would get an exception, right? And talking with some folks in the product team about it and what's going on, the reason for it was that the cleanup process for the orchestration group runs a stored procedure. And that stored procedure is responsible for making sure all members of the orchestration group are validly configured. And what it was doing in my case was removing the two devices I'd put in there for whatever reason. It shouldn't have, right? But it was. And so because there were no members, when I opened the orchestration group up, it would give me the exception. And so there was a modification to the stored procedure to fix that process, fix that flaw. And then I can open it like normal, right? Okay, so that's the cleaning process, is really calling that stored procedure, checking for states, getting the information from the database, and going forward. Now, instead of being idle, now our orchestration group is in process, right? And so we're having to work on it, checking group state, and then notice this, forward BGB, which stands for Big Green Button, which also is how we flag the high-speed notification channel, to communicate with our device. Now, 220 was one of our devices. The other one was 222, right? And so through the high-speed notification channel, the site server is telling this particular client, hey, you need to go and do this action. Now, this action is an action specified by the high-speed notification channel. There's a number of different ones. You can map it in the database. Item 9 is simply the update, deployment, and evaluation cycle. And so, again, remember what I said about this process will not cause software updates to install unless it's past the required time. Because think about it, whenever you're on a device manually and you're troubleshooting things, you will hit the update software update deployment evaluation cycle. And if there are updates that are needed and the system knows they're there and needs to fire them and it's past the required time, they'll start installing, right? So all we have to do is trigger that cycle. And if there are updates that are outside of the required time, they'll start installing, right? So you might ask, and I'll go ahead and answer it here, then I'll illustrate it probably in a minute. Okay, great. Well, Steve, that's awesome. Why would you put an option to manually start orchestration into the console if it's not going to actually result in the updates being installed. But here's the point. It will result in the updates being installed if the updates are past their required time. So consider a situation where maybe there was a failure with your orchestration process, and you go in and you see some failed state. Instead of in process or idle, it says failed, right? So you can go troubleshoot that and figure out why it failed. And now all of these systems that are subject to the orchestration group still have not installed maybe their updates. And so you will restart the orchestration process once you fix it. And now those devices have updates that are beyond their required time, and they'll go ahead and install at that time, right? It's also a good thing to be able to test the system and see how it works. So you see that we are sending down the high-speed notification channel request to say, go ahead and install. And we assign a lock to this member, which is the same ID as up here, which means while this lock is in place on this member, according to my rules, nobody else can do anything, right? Because I said one machine at a time. Now, if you have 5 machines at a time, you can have 5 locks at a time, and so no problem, right? So this is where you see what's going on with the locks being assigned and so on. So this is a really, really good log, and we'll scroll on down and see. We can see where's the next one. There we go. So here's the BGB request going to now 222 and a lock being assigned to 222, right? So that's on the server side. Now, there are a couple of other logs that are interesting on the server side that I will save for a minute in a minute, so I can show them to you. Let's check back in on how our orchestration group is processing. Okay, so we're still in process. So what I'm going to do is pause the video right now until this is done, and then we will make some modifications and we will watch the process unfold at that time. Okay, so it didn't take that long, and we are now idle again. So what I want to do now is make an adjustment to my software updates. All right, so here's my software update orchestration group. I have my deployment. I want to change my deployment settings here from a specific time, which is December 31st, to be as soon as possible. And that way the updates are triggered and installed right away. Now, I'm going to let that bake for a minute, but I'm going to navigate back over to my collections. Now, I mentioned having device collections maybe would be useful for searching when you're building the orchestration group. Another possible reason you might want to use them, notice that I have my demo orchestration group. I have my 2 devices in there that I care about. This is where I'm targeting, right? So I could do it either place. But I'm going to go into my target software update group. And now I'm going to highlight all of these. The second one won't work. But I'm going to highlight all of these and go to client notification. I'm just going to wait another moment or two. And I'm going to trigger a policy download. And so what that will do is cause my policy to immediately be refreshed on my client, and then hopefully those software updates will start to run pretty quickly. So I'm going to follow that. I'm going to do this a couple of times and see. So I'm going to go ahead and do it. I'm going to pause the video, and once this kicks in, I will bring it back forward and we'll see what happens. Oh, and before I pause the video, I'm going to go ahead and also in a minute kick off a software updates deployment and evaluation cycle on those devices so that the orchestra. Now, when I do that, the device normally would do that on its own. I want to go ahead and speed it forward. And then once that happens and the device knows it needs to install those updates, and it also knows it's part of the orchestration group, then it will ask whether it can proceed and get a lock or whether it has to wait, right? So we'll pause here and I'll come back when that process is underway. Okay, so did not take any time at all. In fact, I didn't do a update deployment and evaluation. The policy sync did that. And here is one of my machines. That literally was only a minute or two that I had that paused. You see that the update installation is in progress. And so we're going to let this run and go forward. Now, and then we'll look at the logs and see what happened, right? It's easier to do that probably after this process completes. What the heck? It's in progress. let's do it now. Oh, and let's also show that my other machine, let me pull that up real quick, sorry, is not in progress. It shouldn't be. Hope it's not, because if it is, the orchestration group process is not working correctly. So let's see. Get logged in, and hopefully Software Center is already open. Let's see, it is. So waiting to install. Look at that. So it knows that it needs to install, but it can't install yet because it doesn't have a lock that it can get. So I'm going to go ahead and close that out because we know it's waiting. And then here we're waiting to install as well. So let's just let this progress a bit. I'll check in a couple of times as we go along, and we'll see what happens. Okay, let me show you. So we're waiting to install up here, but down here, it's just refreshing on me. Here we go, updates. I think I clicked something wrong there. Let me scroll down. Come on, scroll. Click down here. Okay, so this is pending, right? So this one is actually being worked on. The others are actually waiting. Let me go check back on my other device and make sure that it's not anything in the pending status. Just check on it real quick. So connect. And hopefully all of them are showing waiting to install. Yeah, so waiting to install. So we can't get a lock right now. Let me see if I can even look in the log and see if I can show that to you. So here's the maintenance coordinator. And look at the bottom here. So let's, orchestration lock is required. Lock is available, no. Request sent, start timer for 60 minutes, registering basic timer. Here's the task, right? So in this case, the lock is not available. We'll come back and look at these logs in more detail in a bit. Let me go to this machine. So this is my other machine. Let me look at the maintenance coordinator log there and see what it says. And again, we'll come look at these logs again in a minute, but I just want to get a live view as to what's happening. Right, successfully started test. So let me look up here a little bit. If not, I'll search for it. Let's look for lock. Lock is available, 1. So yes, lock is available here of 1. And so the PowerShell script, you see it running. It's running right there. No problem. At this stage, I would think maybe we would have our file from our pre-action. Let's just see if that's true. So Windows and then temp. And then I will just pause the video until we get them all done. So here, start text was written. We don't have end text written because the update is still installing. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video. And when all of the options, one last thing I'm going to do just to make absolutely sure. So we saw that the update lock was available on the good machine. This is now my second machine where it shouldn't be installing. Let me just go back and check the log one more time, and we'll see. At the bottom, it should say lock is available, no. Lock is available, no, right? So you're seeing it work, right? We'll go back and review these logs after this process finishes. This will not, this won't probably be nearly as fast as the others. So I'm going to pause it here. I will come back whenever the updates are installed, and we will pick up the discussion. Okay, so it did take a little bit for the updates to complete installing. Reboot, and you can see that they are actually installed now, and they're even gone from the console. But wanted to go ahead and move forward and show you a little bit in the logs. In fact, before I do that, kind of moving forward to the troubleshooting tips and tricks section, we're going to start going through the logs and kind of do a post-mortem on what actually happened here. So let me go back into my client, right, and show you on the client side. Then we'll move to the well, let's start with the server side. Why don't we? So there's a couple of logs on the server side that I want to point out to you. So here are here are all the computers that were in the collection. Let me go just grab the logs. So the first one that we'll look at, well, let's just do SMS_orchestration. So orchestration, not that one. Scroll down a little bit and find it. There, SMS_orchestration group. So we'll just go on down to the bottom here of this log. If I can get this cursor to cooperate with me, there we go. And we'll just see, again, this process just kind of spins and just runs from time to time to check and see what's going on. And we see similar, let's see if I can find it. See if I can search up for this. All right, so this is the orchestration group still being in progress. We see the same kinds of entries. Now, so whenever I first ran this, right? When I first ran this manually from the console, I initiated orchestration from the site server. And that means the site server just basically picked a device that was in my orchestration group and went out and started talking to it and so on. That's not at all how it's going to happen whenever the software update install is initiated on a client that is part of the orchestration group. So when the first client that's part of the orchestration group tries to install the software update, it's going to go to the site server and see if there's a lock available. And if so, a lock will be granted and things will go forward on that client. The other machine will have to wait, kind of as we saw a moment ago. DC0 was in the process of installing. DC1 was in the process of waiting for the clearance to go ahead and process. So the conversation in this log is basically the same, right? So you see all of the tracking of what's going on. You can see the detail of what's going on in terms of the BGB channel and forwarding information back and forth and that conversation, right? So really on the site server SMS orchestration log, the detail is not very different, right? Now, we looked at the SMS orchestration log. We did not look at the policy provider log. So let me go ahead and pull that up. Hopefully, I still have enough information in here to be able to identify what I want. So I mentioned that this process works by putting in policy the instructions and the association that a particular device is part of an orchestration group. Let me just show you the kind of signs about that if I can find it. Let me see what I'm looking for. Let's see. Yes, so if I look for begin processing machine orchestration group, let's see if I can find that. Okay, no, not for up. Of course not, because I'm at the top. Let's go down, and if not, we'll go to the other log. Nope. Okay, let's see if we have it in the other log. Hopefully we do still. Let me close this. Go to the historical log. Oops. Well, we'll find it here. No problem. Let that load. Come on. Okay, begin processing machine orchestration group. Okay, so we found an entry, right? And, whatever. So whenever we do the orchestration group, you're going to see in the policy provider log that we're going to process policy related to that orchestration group, membership and creation and so on. And that's all we're going to really see here. We can see some of the detail about the policy version and so on. All of that doesn't really matter. It matters, but more the point of what I'm trying to do by showing you this log is illustrate that when you create the orchestration group, policy is prepared, is sent down to those devices that are in the orchestration group, telling them that they are a part of that orchestration group, right? So let me go to a client now, and there's a couple of logs that I want to look at there. So specifically, here's my client. I've actually pulled the logs from the client because I did wait overnight to record this last part of the presentation. So I wanted to make sure that the entries were all still there. They probably are in the live logs, but just to make sure, right? So I'm going to start with the policy agent log. And I'm going to go to the bottom and I'm going to search up just for orchestration, actually ORCH, the first 4 characters. So I'm going to search up and we're going to hit an entry that will again tell us, in fact, that we are receiving on this device orchestration group policy. And so here's kind of the blob where it's happening and some instructive information here. I really considered digging into WMI in this session. I don't think I'm going to, but here's a few little tethers, if you will, that might help you if you're looking in WMI. We see the specific policy ID. We see the specific policy version, 8. We also see that this is a machine policy, and we see the policy flags and settings, and then the category we see is orchestration group settings, right? So if we need to dig into WMI, we know where we should be able to go to look, but this should be enough to at least tell us that the machine is receiving the orchestration group policy like it should, right? So now that the machine has the orchestration group policy, we can go into the machine coordinator log, or the maintenance coordinator log, and go to the bottom. And there's just a few entries I want to show you here, kind of how things stack up. So there's a lot of detail in the logs here, and I'm not going to search for every single thing, but I just want to show you a little bit of what you can kind of look for as the orchestration happens, right? The first thing that we're going to make sure of is that a lock is available that will allow us to proceed with the software update installation. And then once that's done, then we're going to have to go through and do our pre-action, go ahead and do the software update install, do the post-action, and then we're done. So this is at the bottom of the log. And so here's kind of the grouping right here of entries that kind of help you track through where things are. And so, for example, you can see if the lock is available. This will be a 0001, kind of like this one is. And then once the pre-action is done, we'll flag that. Once the request is sent and so on, once the post-action is done, we'll flag that. So you see this is at the end of the process, and the post-action is actually finished. And if we glance up a little bit, we're going to see post-action, pre-action is done up here, is set to 1. Lock is available is set to 1. Here's the last idle time, so there's some valid detail in here now. And then post-action done is set to 0, so it's not done yet. And so what we're doing is kicking off our PowerShell script right here. Remember, we have a pre-action and a post-action script, and so we're kicking off the script for the post-action here. This is where the script was downloaded, right? And so how do I know that you can scroll up and down the log and you can see the tracking of these things. I'm not going to bore you with that, right? I wanted to show you what it was, but how do we confirm that the pre and post actions actually ran? So we can go to our machine and go to Windows Temp. And then we should see the flag files. So here we see the end.txt and we see the start.txt. And so those were created specifically by our process running before so the pre-start did the start, or the pre-action did the start, and the post-action did the end.txt. And so we see both of those there. And so we know, in fact, that the process did complete on this machine and so forth, right? Then we have on the client side the updates deployment log, which is a very important log, but it's basically standard troubleshooting for a software update installation at that point. All right. Now, the next part that I want to show you is in the database. So anytime I do, that's the other machine that is still in process because I just woke this thing up. So I waited for the first machine to finish, and then I put it to sleep for the evening and turned it back on. So the second machine is actually just now installing the updates. So what I want to show you next is in SQL, right? Now, anytime that I talk about SQL, it is for education purposes to help you understand how things work, right? Don't touch this without talking to someone from support. Shouldn't be a need to touch this information, but if you feel like you need to for whatever reason, make sure you are talking to someone with support before you do this, right? And so in the ConfigMgr database, if I open tables, the orchestration group tables, there's 3 of them. So I'm going to go down to machine orchestration group is the first table. Machine. Come on. Machine orchestration group. I'm close. There we go. Machine orchestration group, right? So this will just basically show me my orchestration group. So I have 1 and I'll see 1, right? But this is the good detail. You can see which one you're looking at. You can see the ID. We saw that in the logs and correlate it. Then we have the machine orchestration group history. So this could be interesting because this gives us the historical detail of when an action took place on a different orchestration group. So here's the orchestration group member ID and what happened, right? So 224, 225. Now that's interesting. Orchestration group members, let's see if we can correlate that. So here we have 224, 225 is the ID. Here's the group ID. Here's the resource ID. So here's some really good information to understand how things are locked in. So the devices that are part of an orchestration group themselves will have a resource ID. So we have, this is DC0, this is DC1, 220 and 222. So these 2 are part of this orchestration group, which is the one we've been testing, right? We knew that from looking at the orchestration group table and the details also in the console. And then we can tell that the ID of the orchestration group member is here. So we work on the orchestration group by the ID of the orchestration group member here, not by the resource ID. So you'll see this in the logs, right? If you remember that flag file that was dropped into the orchestration group inbox, it would be by the ID of the orchestration group member, which we can then map to the ID of the device itself if we need to right here, right? So that's one section under tables. If we go under views, we have just a couple of items that we can look at for views. So specifically, if we go down to VSMS underscore, let's do that. I still wonder sometimes why they change the structure for the naming here sometimes. Anyway, that's just me questioning while I'm scrolling. VSMS orchestration group members and orchestration group and orchestration group members. So there's these 2 views as well that you can work with. And in fact, some of our queries do work with them. I mentioned stored procedures that were modified as of 2006 hotfix rollup, and so I'm not going to go into the details of those, but those are out there as well, right? Okay, so another thing that I just want to mention here is we're starting to wrap up and get to the end of the discussion. So we can do orchestration. We've shown how we can initiate orchestration from the console if we have a failed condition, if we want to test the engine, whatever. So the way that we might get into that failed condition also could be maybe the clients that are out there, they request to install a software update, go talk to the site to make sure they can obtain a lock, and something goes wrong, right? So they'll get into a failed condition. To be able to restart orchestration in that case, we need to reset those devices and be able to start orchestration, right? So how do we do that? Well, if we go back to the orchestration group, right, and then we look at the members of the orchestration group, and we just click on Show Members, one of the flags that we can do on the members of the orchestration group is right-click and reset orchestration group member. So you can see, if the orchestration group was in a failed state, if it is, go through and reset the members that are problematic. And then at that point, once the members that are problematic are reset, you can proceed to initiate orchestration again from the console. So, specific scenario. If your devices tried to install software updates and they couldn't because orchestration failed, you can go in. At that point, those devices will be past the required install time. So you can go in and fix your problem with orchestration, whatever it is, come back in here and reset it, trigger orchestration to run again from the console. Let me go back to the orchestration group. Trigger orchestration to run again from the console. And at that point, we would go through the whole process. At that point, software updates would get installed once things are fixed with whatever caused the failure of the orchestration group, right? So, okay. So again, wrapping things up, this is this site that I'm demonstrating on is a ConfigMgr 2006 plus hotfix rollup site, specifically to be able to have the stored procedure change that I needed to be able to avoid the exception I was getting when I looked at the orchestration group. But that really wraps up what I wanted to share with you. I've shown you the logs. We've seen a couple of scenarios where this works. And hopefully you have a good feel now of orchestration groups. Take a look at it. It could really help you in some scenarios for being able to deploy software updates from ConfigMgr for all of your devices. So take a look, and I think you'll find it useful. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you next time.